Okay. نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Now, this is a bit of an extraordinary kind of an event. Extraordinary occasions call for extraordinary events. One thing I was thinking about earlier today was, everything we do becomes a part of our history. Every moment we live, every second of every minute of every hour of every day, and then every day of our lives, what's past is past. It becomes the past, it becomes a part of our history. Some things, though, become historic, not just a part of history. They are historically significant. Today, we are living through those historic times. So those of you who may have done some history in school or paid attention in history in school, the things that we were discussing or what we were exposed to, like the World Wars or the Holocaust or anything like that, this is one of those moments which will now be etched in the books and the pages of history. This is what will be discussed. This is what will be analyzed. And what will also be analyzed is not just what was happening in that region, but what the rest of the world was also doing. Our acts, what we did, our omissions, what we failed to do. Today we live in an era where social media is prevalent. We all have social media accounts to some level or not. So we're always leaving some kind of digital footprint. Our progeny, our next generations might do their historical research, maybe in years to come, maybe in decades to come. And they may just search for you to find out what you did and what I did, or what we failed to do. That might be the question. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where I forget the narrator's name. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, may Allah be pleased with him. Prophet ﷺ said, when you see something evil being done, you need to raise your hand to change it. If you can't raise your hands, can't change it with your hands, you do so with your tongue, with your words. If you can't do it with your words, then you hate it in your heart, and that's the lowest form of faith, lowest form of iman. Today we have lots of opportunities in which we can raise our voices at the very least, digitally. And you may know that the IDF have many different departments, one of them being a specific department to put together a counter-narrative to our protests, using bots, using digital content, and it's become somewhat of a digital warfare at the same time as an active warfare strategy. So when we come through times like this, and anyone with any bit of dignity, any bit of humanity, when they see images and videos that we see on a daily basis, the atrocities which are being undertaken, the genocide which is taking place, then what do? We feel something, don't we? Because as an ummah, when a part of the ummah feels pain, the rest of the ummah also feels pain. The rest of the body, we're like one body. So what do? We do protests, we raise funds, but activism goes beyond that. We raise our voices, and how we raise our voices really matters, and it matters more now than ever before. But whilst we consider how we raise our voices, we also have to be conscious that a lot of what we say is being suppressed by the likes of Meta, social media platforms are suppressing our content. I know. I've been shadow banned plenty of times. And we also realize that people have lost their jobs or they've been penalized in some way, shape, or form just because they've shown support towards our brothers and sisters in Palestine. So when we go through situations like that, we need to take guidance. We need to consult those with the knowledge and experience of how to put a message across in a way which is very well articulated, but at the same time challenging what they have thrown across, especially in the Western media, in a way which doesn't result in some kind of a backlash for us as a community. So this is where we bring in the likes of Cage. Cage have been operating for the last 20 odd years in advocacy. Some of you who may know Brother Mozambique, hands up if you've heard of Mozambique. Okay, for those of you who haven't, I'd definitely look into him. There are a few documentaries online. I interviewed him on my podcast last year. It's still pinned at the top of my Facebook page if you want to watch that interview. And Brother Mozambique was in Guantanamo Bay. And Cage was doing some of the advocacy work. And he's now a part of Cage, doing the same work. So we have tonight with us, very fortunate, Brother Anas, who is a lawyer, and he's also the head of public advocacy.
Yeah.
And tonight we're going to be listening to him for guidance. We're going to want to know how it is we can approach these circumstances, this situation, in these current times, in a way which can be effective, meaningful, but at the same time, for us not to be penalized for what we say. And even if we're penalized, keeping it at a minimum. Shadow banning and all that. Bismillah. Jazakallah khair.
Barakallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Amma ba'd. Jazakumullah khairan for making time to come on this cold evening to listen to what I have to say. To begin with, I'll continue from where our brother left off. You know, sometimes making a stand becomes the necessary thing to do, becomes the right thing to do, the just thing to do in that moment. And not taking a stand for what you believe in, or in defense of the rights or lives of others in some moments can actually become a sort of betrayal, if not something even worse. But if we just roll back a little bit, when we come to talk about Palestine, about Palestine, we are talking about a land which there is a Masjid al-Aqsa, the first of the two qiblas of the believers. We are talking about a land which has seen countless prophets pass by it and live on its land and buried beneath it. It is the land which was liberated by none other than Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. It is the land which saw major historic battles in our history. Salah ad-Din, the major battle of Hittin, took place in Palestine. The battle which saw the defeat of the Mongols for the first time against a Muslim army happened actually not too far away from Gaza. The battle was led by the Mamluk Sultans Saif ad-Din Qutuz and al-Zahir Baybars. And obviously that importance of Palestine has been passed down the generations, have been passed down from what, I think I can project some of
That's fine.
Yeah. So the importance of Palestine has been passed down generations. And because it's something that we value from a scriptural perspective, from the scripture, from the hadith, from the Quran, and it's something that we also value from the historical perspective as well. Yeah? And that this is a land in which Muslims have lived in for hundreds of years. So when we see what we see in Gaza, it becomes crucial for us, if not a priority for us, to take action, to take a stand. These are testing moments, as they are testing for the people of Gaza in the most extreme of ways, in the most difficult of ways that we can imagine. But they're also moments where our iman is also tested. Our faith, our conviction, our loyalty is also tested. So will we take action or will we cower and remain silent? Will we uphold our duty to speak the truth or will we provide excuses for our fear or our cowardice? You know, this tragedy that we see unfolding in Gaza, it's like the countless other tragedies that this ummah has seen and has witnessed. And it will pass. But in the records of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will remain. Those who remain steadfast, it'll be written. Those who betrayed, it'll be written. Those who didn't take enough action, it'll be written. So therefore, when you stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you need to have an answer. Whether you stood by your brothers and sisters when they were being massacred, whether they were facing a genocide, or whether you left them to be on their own. You know, the people of Gaza, they have the support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The enemy has the support of global powers. They have the support of the owner of the globe. But the victory or the defense of the Palestinians and the people in Gaza will depend on all of us taking action collectively. It's inconceivable to consider that the inhabitants of a besieged enclave in Palestine will carry the burden of liberation on behalf of the entire ummah. Like they will go forth and sacrifice their lives and lose their mothers and children and grandparents and homes and livelihoods and roads and hospitals and doctors. They'd lose all of that. And we sit here saying we congratulate their sacrifice whilst taking no part in it. Allah expects of us in these types of moments to demonstrate our true brotherhood as one ummah, united as one body. The people of Gaza, they have the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They will remain victorious and defiant so long as they remain firm on their iman. They will remain victorious so long as they remain steadfast in the face of calamities that if they would befall mountains, it would crush them. But we can't let their sacrifices go in vain. Their sacrifices showing us what true connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means. What trust in Allah's qadr, in His decree means. What understanding Allah's eternal wisdom and submitting yourself to it, what that actually means in action. The spread of awareness and the boycott movement. The awakening of so many who were heedless and lost. You know, financially hurting companies that are complicit in harming and besieging the people of Gaza. The unity of Muslims across the globe and across denominations and sects and so on, and nationalities and races, united on one single issue. The issue of Palestine, the issue of Gaza, the exposing of the hypocrites and the traitors, the acknowledgement that the people of Palestine have the right to resist. All of these are sacrifices that we cannot allow to go in vain. And we need to protect them from where we stand. We can't allow their blood and their lives to have gone for nothing in return. And we also need to prevent against the backpedaling of rights. You know, rights are not things that are written on a piece of, law kept in coffers or files, cabinets or whatever it may be. And that when you need to exercise them, you pull out that dusty sheet and you cite that I have the right to do this. Rights only exist when they are exercised. They only exist when they're contested. They only exist when they're fought for. Yeah? You only gain respect and honor if you actually stand up for yourself. But we also have to appreciate that the pain we feel for the people of Gaza and the anguish and the grief has to be converted into action. And we're here because we acknowledge that. And whatever happens in Gaza, whether it becomes a ceasefire or the war comes to an end in some sort of way, our momentum, our support for Palestine, our support for Gaza cannot stop. We need consistent, growing, persistent support for Gaza and for Palestine, irrespective of what happens currently in this battle, in this war. Should you lose motivation, then you need to look back at what motivated you to come to events like this. What motivated you to want to be part of the protest movement, to boycott. Maybe seeing the images of death and destruction might motivate you. For some other people, it demoralizes them. Whatever it is that moves you, then you should reconnect with that and remind yourself of that ultimate purpose that we have in mind. And ultimately, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not change the affair of a people until they change that which is within themselves. And I do not say this in the tone of the pacifists who say this to say that don't protest, don't boycott, don't do anything, just focus on your ibadah and your masjid in your cave. Yeah? And inshallah, victory will come through that. No, we know from the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, from the Sahaba, from our scholars, our history, that both go hand in hand. Strengthening yourself and your family spiritually and also acting in the real world go hand in hand. So, and I quote one Islamic researcher, he said, whoever advises you to fear Allah, distance yourself from sins and transgressions, strive against your own desires and be diligent in night prayers, his words should be weighed within the context of his overall discourse. Some say it to divert you from the entire battle, while others say it to prepare you for the very battle. So the two are not equal, even if their words appear similar or coincide. The first disguises truth with falsehood, while the second clarifies the entire truth for you. And we need to, before we begin this session of like knowing your rights and how to advocate for Palestine, our starting point should be that whatever is legal, we will exercise, we will do. Yeah? And we will also acknowledge where the law is deficient or where it restricts some of our freedoms or abilities to mobilize and organize for the Palestinian people. And that's a critical discussion that we should be having. And we should push back where necessary. So this guidance, inshallah, will be there to allow us to navigate this space. And you'll be able to take questions. I'm going to do it in a kind of more freestyle, open format. So feel free to interject if you want to. And keep in mind, whilst we're speaking about this, how can you effect change in your own space? How can you impact people in your circle of influence? How can you build support networks within and outside those spheres of influence and your networks? So reflect over this and consider it whilst we are going through this. So the way we'll do this, we'll go through a series of questions, and some, they're open for you to respond to. And through that, I find it, from doing this a couple of times, it's better than me giving you a very lengthy, boring lecture on what each piece of legislation means or doesn't mean. So, firstly, very easy. So, can you publicly support the right of Palestinians to resist occupation and defend themselves against war crimes? Is that something that you're allowed to do? Yes. So, I guess the rest are unsure. Okay, so you are. So you're allowed to support you support Palestine, your right to support the Palestinians in their right to resist. And I quote to you the UN General Assembly resolution, and I quote, "The legitimacy of the struggle of peoples for independence, territorial integrity, national unity and liberation from colonial and foreign domination and foreign occupation by all available means, including armed struggle." So it's perfectly legitimate to express support for the rights of Palestinians to defend themselves, to resist occupation, to resist war crimes, right? To resist genocide. That's perfectly legitimate and perfectly legal position to hold. And even broadly supporting the Palestinian cause. So that's something just off the bat to begin with. Now, where this becomes a bit confusing for people is because there are certain laws that put in certain restrictions. Are you aware what proscription means? Is anyone aware what proscription means? Or in a legal context?
Is that when you're not allowed to join an organisation because it's legally banned?
Yeah. So the government has a list that it maintains of organisations which are proscribed. These organisations, you typically describe them as terrorist organisations, yeah, in the common kind of language of the law. And they vary from kind of very niche nationalist liberation movements to kind of much more kind of international terror organizations. And for example, within those lists you'll find the Tamil Tigers. They're a proscribed organization, despite them never committing any sorts of acts of terror on British soil. And you'll find countless other organizations that you've probably never heard of, who are on that list. But when the government prescribes an organization, it means you cannot express any support for that organization, you cannot invite support for that organization, you cannot glorify that organization, you cannot even make statements which imply support for that organization. So it's very, very restrictive, yeah. And you'll fall foul of two particular pieces of legislation under the Terrorism Act 2006, encouragement of terrorism, and also under the Terrorism Act 2000, inviting support for a proscribed organization. So, and in the context of Palestine, something just to acknowledge is that the vast majority of resistance groups have been proscribed in one way or another, either by the UK government or by the Americans or other European governments or by the Israeli regime themselves. So there is obviously a very politicized reason why certain groups are proscribed and why others aren't. And that's something we need to be aware of and conscious of. And however, as we are obviously, for example, Hamas and Izz al-Din al-Qassam or Sarai al-Quds or whatever other groups that are active in Palestine that are also proscribed organization, they're part and parcel of the story, of the narrative of what's going on right now. It's unavoidable. How can you speak about what's happening in Gaza without speaking about Hamas or Sarai al-Quds or the inverted triangle or whatever it may be, right? So you are allowed to share media reports that cite developments that are happening, that speak about maybe attacks that have been taking place in Gaza or outside of Gaza. That is perfectly legitimate, so long as those stories don't actually glorify those organizations that are proscribed, and that you'd be hard pressed to find any media organization doing that. Yeah, unless it's a media organization that's aligned to a particular group, which would then would be considered very differently. So that's just to clear up that point. One that's a bit more simpler. Are you allowed to wear the Palestinian scarf or wear a badge to show or to wave the flag to express your solidarity? Is that something you can do? Yeah. So that's something perfectly legal that you can do. You may remember right at the beginning, 3 months ago, 2.5 months ago, Suella Braverman, who's now gone, she issued a statement to all police constables across the country, telling them that they should look into arresting people who perhaps repeat the chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, or perhaps wave the Palestinian flag too aggressively. I don't know how you do that, but maybe like if you're so angry that your family, the Israeli aircrafts have killed your entire family and you wave the flag, then maybe you should be arrested as a terrorist or something like that. So that's what they try to do. They try to criminalize wearing the Palestinian items of clothing, right? The scarf or the flag or whatever it may be, in order to suppress any support for Palestine. Because they know very well that the vast majority of people support Palestine and stand with the Palestinian people. But that's something that they cannot do. In fact, Cage actually reported the Home Secretary to the EHRC, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which are very slow, as you can imagine, and they're still following up. However, they're unable to put that into law, for now at least anyway. Now, can you attend demonstrations that to show your support for Palestine and oppose Israeli apartheid? Is that something you can do? Yeah, definitely. And this is an important thing. I mean, I don't think anyone is under any illusion that attending a protest will cause the war to cease and stop, and I don't know, Israel to collapse. I don't think anyone's under any illusions. That's the result. However, the protests are important for a multitude of other reasons. Primary amongst them is to show solidarity with our brothers in Palestine. That they see that the vast majority of people, waves upon waves of people, hundreds of thousands on the streets of London last month, actually stand with them, that they're not forgotten. And it also is important to set the narrative domestically as well, that whilst people might be watching GB News or Talk TV or binging on Sky or whatever they may be doing, the people on the streets actually stand with the Palestinians. Yeah, so that is an important message that needs to be communicated. So and we need to keep on attending these protests, supporting them, promoting them, and being there. For the very least, just to enrage those who wish to see our Palestinian people, brothers and sisters, completely erased. So, can you raise funds for Palestine? Is that something we can do? Yeah. So we have, alhamdulillah, there's countless Muslim charities out there that are doing really, really good work on Palestine, supporting orphans, building homes, funding students, supporting the building of hospitals and actually funding them, entire wards. Some charities, I know British charities actually were running entire wards in a Shifa hospital in Gaza, and so many other works that they're supporting. It's perfectly legitimate to donate your sadaqah, your zakah to these charities. Obviously, these charities, they have their own risk assessments, which they do. Because Gaza is run by Hamas, there's lots of complications. But still, it's perfectly legitimate to fund these charities, to support them, to send your money there. And it's not just legal, it's something that we should do. It's an obligation upon us to do. Now, can we make dua for Palestine in Salah? Yeah? Maybe in sujood, because it's quiet. So yeah, obviously you can. So it might seem as a strange question. You may have seen or not that certain kind of Zionist-aligned trolls online and pro-Zionist media outlets were what you now term doxing imams. Yeah, especially sitting down and watching the khutbahs from after every Jum'ah, not to gain any lessons, but to see what dua the imam is making. So he makes dua, may Allah grant people in Gaza victory and destroy their enemies. May Allah give honor to Islam and disgrace the enemies of Islam, right? And they document this and push it out on social media, or maybe through news reports, which has happened, or through much lengthier reports by certain NGOs, and this has also happened. And all of these are scare tactics. Yeah, are just scare tactics to make people essentially silence them, right? And point to take from here is that if we reach to a point where we even have to censor our dua, then we've got to a really bad point. Yeah, and we can't really allow ourselves to get to that point where the dua in the masjid has become a point of discussion. Yeah, or the dua in our salah, on our qunut, is something that is being discussed in the public sphere as like it's fair game. We've had discussion on so many issues around Islam, around hijab, around jihad, around sadaqah, around zakah. Every time there's a public outcry or manufactured outcry, right? And then we end up talking about Islamic law on Question Time, yeah, or on BBC News. And it's just ludicrous. No other religious group or minority will allow themselves to be debated in those sorts of terms. And one other thing to bear in mind is that you cannot set foot in the space of defending Islam and Muslims, of speaking out, advocating for the rights of people, without expecting there to be backlash. And if you are someone who will be shaken to your core by media coverage or by some sort of tweets, then perhaps it's not for you. Perhaps that space is not for you. If you're someone who's easily intimidated, perhaps that space is not for you. And you need to allow that space for people who have the courage and will be able to remain steadfast and not sell their community down cheap. So that's something just to bear in mind. And it's impossible to do any sort of good work without also remaining steadfast and pushing back. Are we aware of does anyone know what BDS stands for? BDS.
Boycott, divestment, sanctions.
Yeah. So boycott, divestment and sanctions. Do you know what it means? What it stands for? What does it represent? Yeah. So yeah, in a nutshell. So it's a movement that was set up initially in 2005 by Palestinian civil society organizations and has since gained international kind of attention. And what is a movement to educate people and to empower them, give them the tools to be able to, and encourage them as well, to boycott Israeli products and the state of Israel in all spaces until the occupation is ended. Yeah, until the occupation is ended. Those are its kind of ultimate aims. And supporting the BDS movement is perfectly legal. You can check their website. I think it's bdsmovement.net, and they have guides, instructions on what you can boycott and how you can boycott, and information there that you can use to educate other people. And it's important to take the lead of organizations which are specialized in this space, in the boycott arena, so that our efforts are more directed and not dispersed and then are lost. The reason why I say that is if we, there are so many brands, like sometimes there are these circular messages where it's like every brand under the sun is like somehow connected to Israel. And it's not really clear, like, are they buying bullets for the Israeli army, or are they just, do they have a shop in Tel Aviv, or is it simply that one of their CEOs happens to be, I don't know, a donor of some sort of pro-settler organization? You don't know what the connection is. So you're unable to make a reasoned assessment of why that organization has met whatever threshold or criteria to be on that list. But also from another perspective is that it can overwhelm people. So if you're given a list of hundreds of organizations or companies, yeah, and when you go shopping, you do your weekly shop, you realize that every other item is on one of those banned lists. Yeah? So buying chocolate for the kids, can't buy that anymore. Go and buy cereal, can't buy Kellogg's. You can't, you just feel sometimes overwhelmed, and because you feel overwhelmed, you feel helpless, and therefore you just give in, right, and just buy whatever you need to buy. And so having organizations which are specialized in this field and actually know what they're talking about, they'll give you much more, tailored advice on what you should boycott. Collectively together, we could actually make an impact against these organizations. Now, if you've seen, for example, the boycott against Starbucks, it's definitely reaped a lot of results. I mean, they've lost something like 11 billion of their stock price since the assault, the genocidal assault on Gaza began, and you can find those are immediate results that you're seeing. And there are other organizations on companies that they have, which you can then check and add them to a boycott list. But there are other smaller things that we can do. We can also check our conscience, right? So if you're going to shop, especially Ramadan's around the corner now, and these are dates, especially Majul dates, happen to be quite popular. So if like it's King Solomon or the Jordan River or whatever these other companies, which we know they're basically they're harvested on occupied land, yeah. So obviously you wouldn't buy those dates. You don't need someone to tell you that this is on a list. Or if you go, I don't know if you like avocados and it's from Israel or whatever produce, especially organic produce in supermarkets, often you'll find that they come from Israel. So obviously you make the conscious choice that you're not going to buy that produce. But when it comes to the broader boycotting, then it's good to take the lead of the BDS movement or Friends of Al-Aqsa, if you're aware of them as well. They also an organization that's quite specialized in this space. Now, I guess most of you should know the answer to this. Can you publicly support Hamas or Hezbollah? Who's brave enough to say? Actually, I won't say. Yeah, so for the record, because obviously there's camera, bro. Yeah, so for the record, yeah, obviously Hamas and Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, whatever it may be, these are proscribed organizations, yeah? Legally prescribed organizations. So that means you cannot express any support for them, you cannot share their material, yeah? You cannot encourage people to join them or whatever it may be. And these are all legal offenses that carry a prison sentence, yeah? So you cannot support these organizations. And what you'll find when people advocate, say, I believe that Palestinians have the right to resist, they'll say, oh, therefore you're supporting Hamas, right? Those two don't go hand in hand, yeah? Every single Palestinian in Gaza and in the West Bank is resisting the Israeli occupation in one way or another. And we support their right to resist, right? So that's just to clear that up. Now, obviously, we mentioned how the politics of prescription is political, right? And I gave you the example like the Tamil Tigers. Another example would be like the ANC and Nelson Mandela. They were also, when South Africa was still an apartheid state, they were, by and large, across the Western Hemisphere, considered a terrorist movement. Nelson Mandela was considered to be a terrorist. But now, if you happen to go to London and you go to visit the House of Parliament, you'll find that there's a statue of Nelson Mandela on Parliament Square. So he's someone who was once considered a terrorist by the British government, is now lauded as a human rights advocate, as a freedom fighter, as someone who people should look up to, as an inspiration. So we need to understand that our moral code is not really set by these legal parameters, but it's also important for us to acknowledge where the legal boundaries are, yeah, and so that we don't fall foul of the law. So that, yeah.
Sorry, are you finished with it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you say that, for example, like we're calling for the military intervention to liberate people of Palestine,
Yeah.
through the establishment of the Khilafah, as an example,
Yeah.
what would be the legality of that?
Yeah, that's a legal position. I mean, it's legal to say that. It's legal to advocate for that. Yeah. I mean, politically, in the media, whatever, there's going to be obviously backlash to that narrative, obviously, and we've seen it. When the brothers from Hizb ut-Tahrir held their protest in London, and one of their speakers, I think he chanted, said jihad, jihad, jihad. Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah. I think Brother Taji did mention that. I think he did repeat that chant. But it's neither here nor there. So it's perfectly legal for it to happen. But obviously we saw how the police came out condemning that, and we saw the government officials coming out and the media entirely outraged. So what I'm saying is that it's a legal thing to say. But there will be consequences to that, and that's not to discourage someone from advocating that. That's just to say that the positions we take, we need to take them and stand by them, and not get shocked when we see people kind of push back. But I think people, and I also say that because people tend to confuse that sort of backlash with what is allowed legally. Yeah, so they will see that response from the Daily Mail or Daily Express, or maybe a certain Home Office minister, junior minister coming out to condemn it, and they'll think, oh yeah, the legal boundary is there and those brothers overstepped it. No.
On that point then, so where Allah says in the Quran that what is the matter with you that you do not fight to liberate people that are oppressed, if you use that in that context, then what would be the legal ramification of that?
The context on that stuff is king. So if for example someone is in that Hizb ut-Tahrir march, because that's the example, and they're saying that Muslim governments have a moral duty and a religious duty to mobilize their armies to liberate Palestine, yeah, and that's they believe that should be done, and they should re-establish the Khilafah, right? And if they mention that verse in that context, and they say, "Ma lakum la tuqatilun," why don't you go out and fight? And this is our duty. It's understood in that. It's understood in that context. But if the context slightly changed, whereby someone is advocating a very different course of action, yeah, where it could be interpreted as you're asking people to commit acts of terror, quote unquote, right? Then obviously there might be other issues there. But these are very kind of prickly matters. It's like sometimes like splitting hairs type of stuff. But fundamentally, do you have the right to say that? Yes. Does the law prohibit that? No. Should you be saying that? If you believe in saying that, then do say it. Exercise your right. That's what I would say to you. So, khair inshallah. So that does with the kind of first section, which deals with some of the issues around supporting Palestine and the legalities and prescription and all that sort of stuff. The next section, inshallah, will deal with Palestine activism with schools and children in particular. Now, over the last 3 months, our caseload has increased by something like 440%. Yeah.
Wow.
And all of those cases, bar a handful, are to do with Palestine. And even the Palestine cases, something like over 50% are actually children that have been impacted. And that's kids being stopped from wearing badges or wearing the scarf or advocating for Palestine in their school, or problems around fundraising for Palestine, or issues of parents in schools around doing fundraisers for Palestine, or schools actually pushing a very pro-Israel, pro-genocide type message on the kids. So all sorts of stuff, yeah? And even people ended up losing their jobs because of their position on Palestine. So there's a lot that's been happening. We'll try and clear this up in terms of what you can and can't do, inshallah, in the same format. So firstly, do our children have the right to protest in their schools? Do they have the right to do that?
Yes.
Yeah. So the way it works, the answer is yes. The simple answer is yes. The way it works is that the right to protest is protected under the basic human rights that each and everyone has. So whether that's in a school setting or outside of the school setting, that right persists, it exists, yeah, throughout. And in the UK, at least, everyone has the fundamental right and freedom to express their views, and this includes children and students, yeah. And schools, in fact, their duty is to uphold these rights and to encourage these rights, not to suppress them. Yeah, they cannot suppress the expression of political ideas from the children. In fact, actually, government guidance, I think I have a quote somewhere come up, actually outlines that schools should be encouraging kids to express their political views rather than suppressing them. So the argument that schools are apolitical, so that's what sometimes the schools say, we don't do any politics in the school. Well, you, as the institution, might decide to be apolitical, right? Yeah. However, the kids aren't apolitical. Yeah. The kids have the right to have their own political views, their beliefs, religious beliefs, whatever it may be. Yeah. And the school can't suppress that by claiming that or by laying claim to some sort of apolitical ideology. So that's so I hope that's kind of clear. And to make this even much clearer, so I think it was 2 years ago when Russia first invaded Ukraine, schools across the country ran protests, raised a flag, fundraisers for Ukraine, yeah, against Russia. So it shows that they do allow protests, they do allow expressions of solidarity, they do allow wearing colors. We've heard of of non-uniform days where kids were asked to come in yellow and blue, the Ukrainian colors. In fact, we actually did a report and people submitted evidence to us, and amongst that there was a school in Luton which fundraised for the Ukrainian military, sending them actually military gear, so like protective garments and helmets and all that sort of stuff. So sometimes seeing that parallel kind of brings it to the fore, because the debate around Palestine is constantly kind of like pummeled and attacked, undermined. So sometimes we get a warped perception of where we actually stand or what we can actually do. And sometimes comparing it against things within recent memory, and you realize, actually, wait a second, you're trying to play a game against us here right now. Now, one of the things that happens is that sometimes schools, they want to penalize a child, say, for example, expressing some views on Palestine. They'll confiscate the phone to find evidence. Yeah. So, are they allowed to confiscate your child's phone or actually investigate the phone itself? Yeah. So they're not really allowed to do that. So the phone remains a child's private, personal property. Schools and authorities can only access it in exceptional circumstances. Yeah. Where they may strongly suspect that there might be like illegal activity taking place, right? Or that the child might be facilitating some sort of criminal activity. In those kind of exceptional scenarios, then they're allowed to kind of access the phone. So they can't intimidate, threaten, manipulate students to share their private information on their phones or whatever it may be. However, sometimes, obviously our children are connected. They might be connected via, I don't know, whatever messaging app they might be speaking to their friends, or whatever groups that they may be on social media. So sometimes what may happen is that some students will take screenshots and share that with the school. So it's important that whilst we encourage our kids to maintain their kind of independence and protect their privacy, we should also educate them on being aware on how to use digital communications, knowing the limitations of it, understanding that once you share something publicly, it's actually public for everyone to see. That when you send a message to a friend, they can screenshot and share it with other people. Don't share compromising, images or whatever it may be. These are general advice, irrespective of Palestine or other activism. But when it comes to these matters, it's even more important that they're aware and they're up to speed. So that's a conversation that we need to have with our children. Some of us might be sending our children to schools where the school will implement a policy on Palestine that makes us uncomfortable. What do you think you should do in response if you feel that you should respond to it? Yeah. So how would you go about challenging it? You can always start a riot, yeah.
Peaceful, of course. You approach the school, don't you? And formally write a letter and say you are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Reply.
Yeah. So the stuff we've seen is that, for example, schools, like predominantly Muslim school, and they bring an organization that's clearly has a pro-Israel Islam to educate the kids on the conflict in the Middle East, like there's some sort of two equal sides there, or that the school has a policy on doing fundraisers for all sorts of humanitarian disasters across the globe, connecting the kids to global issues and human rights. But on Gaza, they seem to have they seem to hesitate. Or it might be that they've taken a very harsh approach to kids expressing their solidarity for Palestine in the classroom, or having a Palestinian scarf or a badge or something on their lapel or on their uniform. So definitely the first point of call should be that you should express your opposition to them, preferably in writing, and maintain a record of your communication with the school. And you should, whilst doing that, review the school's policies, or ask them to cite which policies they're using in order to implement these kind of policies. And you'll find a lot of the time it's not actually within their policies. They actually act outside of their remit, you can say. An example of this is a school in Halifax, so not too far. There was a young Palestinian student. He's actually a refugee, living with his family. He's going to the school. It was non-uniform day, so he wore a top like the young brother there says, "I'm proud to be Palestinian," something like that. And when he entered the classroom, the school was outraged. They asked him to remove the top or to wear it inverted upside down, and the child felt kind of humiliated, targeted. He's Palestinian after all. He's literally lost family members in Gaza. So it was also quite insensitive of the school to take that course of action with him. And after the community coming together, standing by that child, writing to the school, Cage was involved, another Muslim organization was also involved in supporting the parents. The school actually reversed its policies, apologized to the community, committed itself to learning more about Palestine, to bringing in organizations to teach the kids about Palestine, the correct narrative, to run fundraisers for Palestine, to allow kids to wear the badges or scarves or whatever they may be to express their solidarity and support. So it shows that pushing back does have results, and we've seen that. And other schools as well. We've seen that in other schools across the country. And sometimes a lot of these head teachers, unfortunately, sometimes they feel like maybe because they're talking down to kids the whole time, they have a warped sense of what reality is like. And they feel like it's like they fiefdom and they can do as they please and force their views on others. And sometimes just a very polite email could actually correct the course.
And sometimes, sorry, just to add to that, sometimes a preemptive communication strategy works as well. We have a local school here who delivered something, it's a high school, delivered something to all the students in the school, the same presentation. Some students walked away with a very frightening kind of interpretation of what was delivered. So when I emailed the school head teacher, I asked for a copy of the presentation and any annotations and aids that were used to deliver that presentation. She eventually invited me in for a chat, got to a better understanding of what the situation was. Eventually she wanted me to come onto the Board of Governors, which I respectfully declined. But now she wants to organize something for the community during Ramadan to have like an iftar event to build those relationships. So sometimes it's not always like at loggerheads. We might assume that because of something having been delivered, but sometimes it's just a case of trying to understand, okay, this could change its course just by having dialogue. Maybe there's misinterpretation from their side, citing some examples, news articles, YouTube clips. That's what I was doing, and the whole perception has changed now. So sometimes it's a preemptive action rather than a reactive one. So a proactive approach sometimes works.
Yeah, that's perfectly true, Akhi. A similar example to that, there was a case where a head teacher, again of a Muslim majority school, decided to, on his own accord, he put together a presentation and called a school assembly. This presentation on a political issue as contentious as the Palestine one was not vetted by the school board or by other members of the senior leadership team. It's just something that he felt, is his purpose in life to do. And it was very, very much the kind of boring, lazy narrative that you can expect to hear from kind of mainstream media or kind of pro-Israel outlets that minimize the suffering of the Palestinians, that kind of equate both sides, that create parallels where they don't exist. And a lot of the kids were upset by that sort of presentation, and they raised their concerns. Their parents again reached out to Cage and to other organizations. We helped them push back against that. And in the end, the head teacher, I think he's taking a leave of absence or something, but the school have apologized, and they've the one that told us they didn't vet this talk. It wasn't something that should have ever been delivered, and they're happy to kind of engage in any sort of corrective action that the community felt or the parents felt necessary to do. So it shows engagement with the schools does reap a lot of results.
So two questions. One, are there any like pre-templated emails or text that can be used or made available to people? Are you aware of anything like that?
I'm sure our casework team's sitting on that sort of material. So if you needed something, then do reach out to them, and I'm sure that they'll help you.
Or we can make it available in the video description link.
Yeah, if you put in, we'll put it into.
Sorry, sister. Yeah.
And there are some local schools that have already been sent letters, so we have got some paperwork on some of the stuff that's been compared to. I did have a comment, statement, question, whatever you call it. I think the problem is it's not a level playing field.
Of course.
So we get frustrated by having to fight for every child, for every school, even workplaces. And we can talk about that as well later. But because it's not a level playing field, it's very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable to have those conversations. It becomes uncomfortable for children that are not kind of mature enough or aren't articulate enough to fight every conversation, because it is sometimes adults against kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how you kind of deal with that with the schools that are actually specifically showing that they aren't on board with this, and you can have this conversation, but is the subtleties of Islamophobia, racism that exists anyway, even before this started, that we're always still trying to battle. And how do you, despite knowing your rights, despite knowing that you're in the right, still always having to battle? It's like exhausting. Where to put your energy with everything else that's going on.
Yeah, it's a very valid point. There isn't like kind of like a sort of one answer to that. I mean, the work that that we're doing at Cage and that other Muslim NGOs that are in the advocacy space, whether that be MEND or Friends of Al-Aqsa or Prevent Watch or others, they're trying to empower people, educate them on those issues and on the broader context that you accurately described there. And it is an unfair playing field. Our community and the pro-Palestine movement, as organized as they are and as vocal as they are, they still don't monopolize or control the mediums of mass communication, and the influence within the Whitehall is still quite minimal. And there's a multiple reasons for that. Political, ideological, racism plays a role, Islamophobia, and we have to continue battling against that. And I guess the emergence of organized Muslim bodies to challenge that is an attempt to address those sort of underlying issues and kind of lift the burden from the individual Muslim of the daily fight for kind of essentially just expressing yourself or just being yourself. That not every day is a fight. So I don't really have an answer to that. Unfortunately, we do find ourselves in that particular context. But I think that we can find a lot of solace and a lot of comfort in us coming together. I was very pleased to know, for example, this event was organized with there's 4 or 5 different masajid that were involved in promoting it. And obviously they're from very different backgrounds and so on, and that's quite refreshing, and that's something that we've seen quite a lot over the last couple of months on the issue of Palestine, that people have come together and recognize that there are broader issues that we need to campaign on and put our differences aside for. And that gives us strength, that gives us the ability to keep going. It reminds us of our ultimate purpose, and through that we just have strength, solidarity with each other. I think that's what we can take away from it, really. Alhamdulillah, from a spiritual perspective, we know that we're rewarded for each and every one of these struggles, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will record that for us. And that's an effort of us passing down our deen, our culture, our faith, our values to our kids and to the next generation. It requires that struggle. The early Muslims faced similar, actually worse, struggles in Mecca, and they remain steadfast until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted and blessed them with deliverance. So it's something that we need to remind ourselves of, and I guess maybe a way to circumvent that sense of feeling alone or feeling weak is to organize yourself, create a kind of a support network around you of like-minded people or parents or whatever it may be, that reassure you, that kind of remind you of why you're doing what you're doing, and keep you focused in that way.
Just to add to that, it's a very valid point, and something we've seen within the Muslim world. There's no issue which is uniting the Muslims more than the Palestinian issue. And Burton's an example of that, where we have all the masajid getting together on this. We also have representatives from each of the different communities within the same forums, and where you have the proactive measures taking place, like the letters that you mentioned and you were asking about as well. So there was letters sent out proactively when this kicked off right at the very beginning to all the schools to confirm that they won't penalize our children for showing support or solidarity towards the Palestinians. They won't refer them to Prevent, unduly and without any kind of dialogue with the parents and the proper ways of doing things. So there were proactive measures taking place. So also, I would also encourage everybody in the room to take some time out to play decision-making roles, or participate in decision-making roles within schools. Join the Board of Governors and have your say, have our voices heard, because without that, what are you relying on? If on the Board of Governors you've got our own people or people who have the similar mindset as you representing the community, it's only then we can have some kind of leverage in the decision making. If that's not there, and complaints, we know complaints policies have different stages. The first stage usually goes to the head teacher. The second stage goes to the Board of Governors. And if the Board of Governors don't have, a balanced representation, or at least a representation where individuals are aware of what's going on, then you're just relying on another person in the crowd, aren't we? So I would also encourage people to be active in those kind of roles.
Just because you mentioned prevent, so I assume everyone, or most of us, should be aware of prevent, at least. So prevent is a government program that's been around for the best part of about 15 years. It's a scheme that purports to stop people being drawn into extremism and terrorism. In effect, what it is like a mass spying program, particularly on Muslims, and it's a way to suppress political expression, especially views that seem to go against the grain. And multiple reports, examinations, reviews have proven this beyond any reasonable doubt, that is the nature of that program by academics from across the board. Cage spent countless years basically campaigning against prevent, leaking prevent training, producing reports demonstrating that it's based on fake science, that it has Islamophobic foundations, that it harms communities, it doesn't better them, that it undermines trust between schools, parents, teachers, students, doctors, patients, and so on. and that overall, even according to Prevent's own statistics, like 95% of all referrals are considered to be false positives. That's according to their stats. So if 95% are false positives, what is it actually doing? It seems like it's just institutionalizing people, taking people's names like a Hoover and putting them to a system where they might be monitored as potential criminals at some point in the future. And there was actually a leak not too long ago, I think about 2 weeks ago, on the Observer, the Guardian's Observer, saying that actually people's names, kids' names that are taken by the Prevent strategy are actually handed over to other agencies, including the Border Force. So someone might be stopped at the border because there was a referral at Prevent some years ago. So we know that it harms people, and now the consensus is across the board that it's something to be rejected, something that needs to be abolished. For a short period of time, that was the official position of the Labour Party before Keir. And it was also actually no, the Labour Party were highly skeptical of it, and it's also the position of much of the trade unions, teacher unions, and so on, that they stand against Prevent. Now, sometimes in some extreme circumstances, some schools may decide that this expression for support for Palestine is so powerful that it deserves to be referred to Prevent, and it has happened. And in most instances, it gets nowhere, because even according to their own kind of guidelines, it doesn't quite fit. However, should that happen, then parents just need to maintain composure, understand that it's not the end of the world type of thing. Understand what's actually understand the actual issue, what's the actual problem, and get that preferably in writing. Establish a clear line of communication between you and whoever's doing the referral or managing the process, and make sure that you seek legal advice or advice from Cage, and know your rights and know where you stand. And in the vast majority of cases, after just the initial review, it's usually put to bed. There's nothing really to be done about it. But we do appreciate the kind of like pressure and stress that it places on parents once Prevent is mentioned, and that's perhaps one of the main purposes of the Prevent program, is that it creates that sense of fear and anxiety over certain issues that you feel we can't touch those issues. When it comes to employment rights or in the workplace, so generally what we've said generally applies. So people's right to freedom of association, freedom of belief, the right to protest, all of that generally applies. Now, there can be certain sort of exceptions. So in some roles, you may not be allowed to publicly declare your political views. Like, for example, if you work for the NHS, maybe they will not allow you to wear a badge for Palestine. Yeah, but even in those sort of cases, you need to delve deeper and understand whether this is born out of sort of a policy on partiality, or whether it's a sort of double standards on Palestine. And again, the easiest way to do it is to see the track record of that particular health trust, whether they've allowed health workers to publicly express support for other causes and other issues. Perhaps it may be Ukraine, or it might be other kind of minority issues that they lend their support to. So, and then in those instances, you can then make a complaint and mount a challenge. Also, again, a crucial thing when it comes to disciplinaries is to establish whether this is actually an informal process or whether it's a formal process. Because sometimes these things are confused deliberately in order for an employer to strengthen their hand. So if they process you informally, they feel like because you fear a formal process, a formal kind of disciplinary procedure, you're then more likely to concede ground where you don't need to. So sometimes it's important, even if it's informal, to ensure that things remain quite clear and in writing. And ultimately, as an employee in any sector, you have the right to your own personal beliefs and to your own political opinions. So that can't be undermined or undercut by any employer. And also obviously your right to privacy as well. That's a crucial one in that context. And we've seen, routinely health workers come out on the streets to protest for Palestine, even wearing their kind of their uniform. And teachers and others, is a perfectly legitimate thing to do. The only where it becomes a bit difficult is where that crosses into the workspace itself, and then it depends on the particular workspace. So if you're, like, let's say a self-employed electrician, you got your own van, and there's obviously you're contracted by a company, then it's a very different workspace to where, for example, if you work as a doctor or a nurse, or if you're a teacher in a school. And there might be other policies that you might need to navigate. So these issues require more kind of a case-by-case analysis. So this is just a very broad, general kind of advice. That brings us to the end of it. Is there any questions before we come to a conclusion? Okay, inshallah. So how can we then express our support for Palestine? What are some ways that we can support Palestine? Firstly, I just wanted to mention this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he said that there will always be a band from my ummah triumphant upon the truth, victorious over their enemies. There will be no harm from those who oppose them from those who oppose them, and they will not be harmed until the order of Allah comes. And they will be like that, triumphant. They said, "O Rasulullah, where are they?" He said, "In Bayt al-Maqdis and the precincts of Bayt al-Maqdis." This hadith is in Tabarani and in Haythami, actually in Musnad Imam Ahmad, and authenticated by Tabari and al-Haythami. This hadith tells us a very important thing, that there will be a band of this ummah who are victorious, who have the support, the divine assistance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this hadith specifies that they will be in Al-Quds, in Palestine, and around Palestine. So for us, the first thing that we should do is choose our side. We will be on the side of that victorious party, the party that's upon the truth, the side of the oppressed, the side of those who've been occupied, those who've been colonized? Or will you be with the occupiers and those who are the aggressors? Or perhaps you might take the position to be a neutral. Yeah, you'll sit on the fence. And we know when it comes between truth and falsehood, there's no neutral space. It's either the truth or it's either falsehood. Secondly, we need to remain connected to the issues in Palestine. And that means we need to follow the developments very closely. Yeah? That's not saying to expose yourself if it hurts you to see the pictures of the pain and grief, but it means to remain connected, yeah, to be aware of what's happening. For example, myself, I know I get overwhelmed with those types of images, yeah, but sometimes I do see them because it reminds me of what's at stake here. So likewise, you need to consider to strike a balance between remaining motivated and continuing on the path, and also remain connected to the issues. And these issues will remain, whether once this war comes to an end, Palestine still will remain a central issue for all Muslims and all fair-minded people across the world. Thirdly is that we need to spread awareness. We need to push the right narrative. You know, we cannot accept the narrative of both sides. Like there's a war between two neighboring states. That's a false narrative. Yeah, we don't accept the narrative that the 7th of October was day one. That's a false narrative. We don't accept the narrative that the Palestinians they're just predisposed, you know, to commit violence. Yeah, or that from the river to the sea is a genocidal chant. We need to correct the narrative, and sometimes because the West in particular has a very dark history with the Jews, and also the West generally has a very genocidal history. They project their kind of history on other people seeking liberation. So when these people say we want our homeland back and free, they think, oh yeah, we freed America by killing all the natives, or we won over Australia by killing all the Aborigines. But no, that's not our history. That's not our values. If you look at our history, we don't have a history. We don't have a bloodlust. We're not out there to kill people. I mean, India still has approximately about 1 billion Hindus, and it was pretty much ruled by Muslims for centuries. If Muslims hated non-Muslims that much, there would be no non-Muslims across much of where the Muslim world or the Muslim caliphate historically stretched to. So that's not our history. That's not our narrative. And we need to counter the fake propaganda. You know, the propaganda about babies being, you know, and all the other claims, the false claims that are being made, that there's training camps underneath a Shifa hospital, which ended up being false. They said they store weapons in the hospital, ended up being false. You know, the weapons that they showed was in the MRI room. So which is impossible, because if the machine is being used, which it was being used, the guns will just stick to the machine. So then and you can't remove them because it's magnetic. So we need to challenge the propaganda. And alhamdulillah, we've seen how effective social media has been in challenging and undermining the propaganda. Such so that they're spending millions on YouTube ads and Instagram ads and whatever just to get your attention. Yeah? And they're pumping thousands upon thousands onto all these influencers and other kind of celebrities to push out their fake stories. And you might have seen that they thought they struck a coup by inviting a British journalist by the name of Owen Jones. So he was invited to watch the Israeli propaganda video about what happened on the 7th of October. So he watched it and he came out and did a review, and that review was so scathing. Yeah, they did not know what came at them. They couldn't believe it. And he essentially, in one 20-minute clip, destroyed that entire narrative around that this video proves that the Palestinians are brutes and whatever, and that this happened. He said, yeah, there was evidence, obviously there was a war. People went out, they were fighting, they had guns, there was killing, there was that. But he said, your claims of children being beheaded, or that assaults and whatever was happening, it's not proven by what's on the footage that you have. Again, it just shows that very simple things, just challenging. You find these viral clips of these kind of like American girls somewhere living in the Midwest, and they're just saying, this just doesn't make sense, and that undermines $1 million propaganda machine. So it's important. So we shouldn't undermine our individual efforts in setting the narrative and pushing the right narrative. Fourthly, we should educate the next generation. Palestine is for those who are in for the long run. Yeah, as much of the issues that Muslims face globally is for the long run, and we need to be prepared for that mentally, and also educate our children about it. Tell them why Palestine is important. Tell them why Masjid al-Aqsa is important. Tell them about the stories of the prophets who lived in Palestine. Yeah, tell them about the stories in the Quran that mention Palestine, and that's important to remain and to continue that connection with the Holy Land. Fifth is to boycott the enablers of Israel. Those who enable the genocide, we need to boycott them. So those who come to speak at our pulpits every 4 or 5 years to take our votes, and they were silent whilst there's a genocide taking place, I think there's a strong argument to say that they don't deserve any of our votes, and they don't deserve to be in our masajid, in our spaces. And these are important discussions that we need to have, in addition to the boycotting the goods of companies that are complicit in the violence against the people of Palestine. Six, we should attend rallies, or organize rallies to support Palestine, express support for them, and make it difficult. We need to get to the point where we make it extremely difficult for them to maintain public support for Israel. We need to create that parity. If they're trying to make supporting Palestine incredibly uncomfortable and nearly on the kind of criminal borders, at least through their language, we need to make supporting Israel as equally as uncomfortable. And it's an easier job. I mean, how could a fair-minded person support what's happening in Gaza unless you have essentially no humanity left in you to see that level of destruction and death and still support him? Seventh, we should give in charity, we should give in sadaqah, and we've spoken about the importance of that. And those who are able, they should also try and visit Masjid al-Aqsa, try and visit Gaza if possible. And again, that's a form of connecting yourself to the land, connecting yourself to the people. And importantly, again, is to invoke Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our prayers, in the moments where dua is answered, to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for victory, for deliverance, for peace, for justice. These are important things that we should do, and we shouldn't undermine that. The Prophet ﷺ, he left for a battle, and he told the Sahaba, he said to them, there are people who are left in Medina, that you do not cross any valley or ascend any mountain or traverse any land or strike any blow of your swords except that they have a portion of that reward. And he said, those are the people who remain back, who are making dua for you. Yeah? So imagine that, they have a share in the reward of those who are on the front line sacrificing themselves. So if we want to share of the reward of the people of Gaza, the least we can do is make dua for them. And that allows us to connect ourselves to them, and actually feel empowered through our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And 10th, and the last point, is to use this moment to gain clarity. I mean, it's been, the last 2-3 months have unraveled secrets and exposed people who've been hiding for decades. We need to make note of those who are Muslims or claim they're Muslims yet betray the Palestinians and betray Al-Aqsa. We need to take notes of those who talk about human rights and advocate for human rights, but seem to have a blind spot when it comes to Palestine again, and that exposes their hypocrisy. We need to make note of those Muslims in public life who have public platforms, who are maybe influencers or artists, who've not even put out one single post in support of Palestine. Not even one. And one of them is actually a Palestinian. We need to actually acknowledge and learn and see who these hypocrites are and how they act and how they speak, so that we're not deceived by them in other times. And again, we need to again acknowledge that in these moments there will be people from all walks of life who come to the aid of the Palestinians, and some we may see eye to eye with them on ideological issues, and I don't mean intra-Muslim debates, I mean outside of the Muslim community. And they may actually not support Muslims on other issues. Like, for example, they might not support you when it comes to standing against the brutality of the butcher of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, or against the barbarism of the Chinese Communist Party against the Uyghurs in East Turkestan. But they will support the Palestinian people. So we just need to appreciate that people will meet us on the issue of Palestine, but they might leave us on other issues. And why should we be aware of that? So that we're not drawn into that kind of line of thinking. It's just to know it, to acknowledge it, and to see it for what it is, and to value it. And obviously, we can appreciate it. La yashkur nas, la yashkur Allah, as the narration says, that whoever is not grateful to people is not grateful to Allah. And with that, inshallah, we'll come to an end of this Know Your Rights lecture. Jazakumullah khairan for being for entertaining me. If you're being penalized or facing some challenges because you've supported Palestine in your workspace, or it's your kids in school, or I don't know, in any sphere of life, then please feel free to reach out to Cage. You can go on our website. We've got a fresh new website now. We've rebranded as Cage International. We're growing our work in different countries as well, training other Muslim organizations across Europe to do the same work that we're doing here, and inshallah expand the work in defending Muslims and standing for justice globally. And we have a helpline, we have caseworkers on call who are there to support you. All of this, alhamdulillah, is a free service. We don't charge a penny for anything that we do. These lectures, traveling, the casework service that we do, the campaigns that we mount, all of this is a free service for the community, because Cage is entirely funded 100% by the community. We don't receive grants from grant-giving bodies or from the government or from anyone. We believe that the strength of Cage and the strength of our community is in our independence, and that financial independence is a key aspect of that. So I'll ask each and every one of you, once you're leaving today, if you're able to contribute. For example, a single case can cost us anything from £100 to £500, sometimes even more, depending on how long we have to work on that case. So if you're able to support like one case by donating something like £100, that would be really great. If you're able to give something less, then that would be much appreciated. And again, this is, as they say, the Arabs, they say, minkum wa ilaykum, from you and back to you. It's like an investment in yourself, investment in your community. And if we're stronger together, then we'll be able to face the challenges that we face collectively. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us strength, Ameen. Solidarity, Iman, and Ameen. Enable us to be there for our Palestinian brothers and sisters in a better way, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, and grant them victory and liberate Palestine in our lifetimes, inshallah. Allahumma ameen. Subhanakallah bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you, Brother Anas, for a very enlightening session. I'm sure a lot of us will have appreciated, especially the Q&A sessions with regards to certain scenarios. As Brother Anas has said, just pop over to the website. If you have any particular concerns, you can contact them directly. Otherwise, we'd also like to thank the Masjid collective effort. We have some representatives in the room here today. And may this also continue, this unity and love and bonding between the brothers also continue, and the communities also continue. If there's anything else anybody would like to ask before we close this, speak now or forever hold your peace. No? Okay. Well, Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for coming out this evening. Any questions you also have, Brother Ishtiaq, who was leading, I believe, on this in making this connection. His number is on the poster, and you have your local masjid as well, which you can contact the representatives of if you have any other further questions related to this. Please do donate generousely. You have a card machine, I believe, as well.
Yeah, we've got a card machine. The brother has got a card machine.
Alhamdulillah. So there's no excuses there. It's not like you're Nendra. So just be generous with that, and inshallah, hopefully we'll get to see you at another event so similar to this. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.